Well, hello again. Happy Sunday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are. I know that it is good. And I'm grateful to be here with each and every one of you. I would love if you could join me in this centering prayer as we prepare to dive into today's message. And so I encourage you to repeat after me. I welcome the Spirit of truth into my mind and let it grow in my heart. Thank you, God, in, through, and as me. Amen. Ashe. And so it is. Well, as always, as we move through a series, I love to highlight the previous week's sermon so we can understand that foundation as it takes us into this week. And so last week, we began this series with the sermon, A Champion's Prayer. And I said the champions aren't made in the fourth quarter. Champions are made in practice. And thy will be done is a champion's prayer. A prosperous life is not made out there in the world. A prosperous life is made in your consciousness, in your inner world, not in your doing. And so in that sermon, I took the time to break down the three components of this prayer, thy will be done. And I encourage you, if you missed that, to go back to it. It is powerful and, of course, sets us up and creates the focus for our sermon series, Thy Will Be Done, where surrender meets miracles. I want to take you back to a time in my life where I was struggling. In fact, I was financially overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed and in shambles with my finances. There was a relationship that I was in that I ended it because I didn't want her to know how bad things had gotten for me financially. I was so ashamed. I was so embarrassed. That was one of the reasons that I ended that relationship. But things didn't end there. They got worse, and I was behind on my rent, so much so that I was facing eviction. And there's a process in the state of New Jersey that before you're fully evicted, you go through a pre-eviction where you're locked out of your apartment and you're given a amount of time to pay the back rent, and then you can get back in your apartment before they move forward with the full eviction proceedings. I did not have the money, and so I faced this pre-eviction, and I was locked out of my apartment. And I remember that day, because it was going into the weekend, so it was the Friday afternoon that they were going to lock the apartment. And so I packed, a bag and decided that I would spend the weekend in a hotel. I reached out to a friend who was going to let me stay on her couch in her basement apartment for the week. And I remember at that time I had been doing some work. I'd been doing some work around my consciousness. And so this felt even more like a cosmic joke, and I felt even more like a failure because I've been doing all of these things and affirming and all the stuff that people said you were supposed to do, and I wasn't experiencing the prosperity that I expected. But out of that practice, one of the things that I had done all throughout my apartment, I had created these signs that just said grateful. I put them all throughout my apartment, and one of the most important places I put it was on the door to my apartment, so that when I would leave on the inside door, that was the last thing I would see. And so I remember I'm getting ready to leave, and I look before I open the door and I see that sign, grateful. And I stopped and I turned around and looked in my living room and kind of just scanned the living room. And I said, well, it's just you and me, God. That was my surrender moment. And I'm sure you can relate to experiencing a moment in your life that was so overwhelming, so mentally taxing, so painful that you finally said what I said, well, it's just you and me, God. Or you may have just said, I give up, or I give in. Or I'm reminded of P.Y.'s sermon, there's got to be another way, right? And this is the problem with our collective misunderstanding of surrender. See, you have been taught to treat surrender as the final step when all else fails. It's like the classic gospel song, Stand by Donnie McClurkin. After you've done all you can, and then you just stand, right? So there's this collective idea that you're supposed to do all of these things, and then finally, then you rest and rely on God. This is the collective understanding. But surrender is not your final option. Surrender is not your last resort. In fact, surrender should be your first and only option. Surrender should be your first and only option. Surrender is a way of living and being that leads to a life of miracles and answered prayers. And so today, in my mind's ear, I hear Spirit speaking to us. I hear Spirit singing to us. See, while you think of surrender as your final option or your last resort, Spirit is singing the Aretha Franklin classic written by her sister Carolyn Franklin to you. Ain't no way for me to love you if you won't let me. Said it ain't no way for me to give you all you need if you won't let me give all of me. Surrender is the path to experiencing the miraculous love of God in, through, and as your life. Surrender is the path to receiving all of life's riches. Surrender is the path to miracles. Surrender should be what? Your first and only option. But as long as you think of and treat surrender as the last option, ain't no way Source can love you. As long as you think of surrender as a last resort, ain't no way Source can give you all you need. So then this begs a few questions. PG, what is surrender? And how do we practice it? And how do we live in surrender? There's a wonderful passage in 365 Days of Richer Living. It's from January 11th. 365 Days of Richer Living is written by Ernest Holmes and Raymond Charles Barker. And at the end of that entry, we read these words, which on their face, you might not think they have anything to do with surrender, but we're going to talk a little bit about it. We read these words, "Today I make a greater claim upon good. Today I speak my word, knowing that it will not return unto me void. It must accomplish and prosper, not because of the power of my will, but because I am willing to let, to permit, to accept guidance, power, and peace." I want to read that last sentence again. Not because of the power of my will, but because I am willing to let, to permit, to accept guidance, power, and peace. So first, to understand what surrender is, sometimes we got to talk about what it is not. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is not waving the white flag. Surrender is not a passive, impotent way of living or powerless way of living. Surrender is not being irresponsible, and surrender is not magical thinking. This passage is giving us a clue to what surrender actually looks like in practice. Not because of the power of my will, we read. Now, of course, this takes us back to what I shared in last week's sermon in a champion's prayer, as we know and hear in the mouth of Jesus, not my will, but thy will be done, right? We recognize that surrender is the realization that there is a vantage point you do not possess from your 5 sense perspective. You see, what you see, taste, touch, smell, and hear is actually very limited, and science proves that to us over and over again. Right? We recognize that we can only focus our attention on so many things at one time. Right? As I'm sitting here now, there's a whole bunch of things happening around me. There's a whole bunch of things happening outside on the street, on Bedford Avenue. Right? There are things happening in the sky above us right now. Right? But based on what we can see, taste, touch, or smell and hear, we may not have that information, and we may not have that awareness. But surrender is the realization that there is a vantage point you do not possess. And the spiritually minded know that you have access to this perspective. It's like a mothership that knows all, sees all, that knows and sees from a higher vantage point. This is why I love and always quote Emerson, where Emerson writes that prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. And so even the act of prayer is an act of surrender, because what you're choosing to do is close your eyes to the physical and open your eyes to the eternal, recognizing that you need to contemplate the facts of life from the highest point of view. Let us move on up a little higher. Let's go upstairs. This is what surrender is. Now, in the second part of that sentence that I repeated earlier, we read, I am willing to let, to permit, to accept guidance, power, and peace. I am willing to let, permit, accept guidance, power, and peace. And so this sentence alone, this is why I say that surrender is not giving up or giving in. It's not powerlessness. It's not impotent. It's not, what's the other word I use? I said it's not a passive way of living, right? Surrender is active letting, permitting, and accepting. I'm willing to let, permit, and accept guidance, power, and peace. You're not giving up or giving in. You are letting and permitting love, God, life, source, the universe, whatever word feels good to you, to love you, to guide you, to be power in, through, and as you and as your life, to be peace in, through, and as you and your life. But you see how surrender is actually a power move? Because only you can let, only you can permit, only you can accept. And see, here's the thing. God, source, the universe, being love, cannot provide guidance, power, and peace without your acceptance, without your willingness, without your permission, without your surrender. So this is why surrender is a point of power, is an act of power. It is a champion's way of living in the world. You see how empowering that is? This is why last week I said that thy will be done is a champion's prayer and represents the mindset of a champion, represents the mindset of someone who has power, represents the mindset of someone who has access, represents the mindset of someone who knows who they truly are and where they are. And so this is why Spirit is singing to you, ain't no way. The song goes even further. How can I give you all the things I can if you're tying both of my hands? See, when we don't let, when we don't permit, when we don't allow, we don't accept Spirit's operation in, through, and as us, we're tying Spirit's hands, not because Spirit is unable, but Spirit works for us by working through us. And Spirit cannot overcome our belief systems when they are not serving us. And then the song goes on. It says, oh, don't try to be someone you're not. Oh, Lord, have mercy. I love that line in this context. Because you are a spiritual being having what? A human experience. When you try to figure it out on your own, when you rest on your limited knowledge and intelligence, although it may seem vast and wonderful from a human perspective, it's always limited. Erykah Badu sang that, right? The man that knows something knows that he knows nothing at all. When you try to operate from your strength and your will, when you surrender only as a last resort, you're being someone you're not. And Spirit is saying to you, ain't no way. You're tying my hands. Ain't no way for me to give you all the things that you want to be, do, and have. Ain't no way that I can give you and provide and lead you and guide you to the answer, to the solution, to the remedy. When you're out here being someone you're not. When you're living solely from your humanness as though that's all you are. Living beneath your privilege. It's like you're taking a math test. And the teacher allows you to use a calculator, but you refuse. In fact, the teacher is not just allowing you to use the calculator, but is encouraging you to. The teacher is saying to you, you will get through the problems with ease. The teacher is saying to you that you will complete the problems faster. The teacher is saying to you that they don't want you to be overwhelmed. So please, please, please use the calculator. But you only choose to use the calculator as a last resort at the 11th hour, 5 minutes before the test taking period is over. And now you're panicked and overwhelmed. Hello, somebody. I know I'm in your business. Think about that for a second, because this is how you're out here living. Review those moments in your life where that's exactly what you were doing. You have a calculator. The teacher said use it, and not just said use it, but encouraged you to use it and told you why you should use it. But you're like, nah, I'm good. Nah, I'll wait. Calculators are just for last resort. I know what the teacher is saying. The teacher has more knowledge and information and awareness than I do. The teacher prepared the test and knows what's on the test, and is saying, in order to achieve what you want to achieve, to move through this thing easily and effortlessly, to move through this thing and accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish, use the calculator. But you're like, no. But then you get stressed, you get anxious, you get worried. The doubt and fear creeps up. Now you're rushing to use the calculator as a last resort. And see, when you live that way, ain't no way for Source to give you all it can give you. Ain't no way for Source to love you like it really can. Ain't no way. And so as I talk about my surrender moment, and I looked around my living room and said, okay, God, it's just you and me. Not knowing how I was going to get back in my apartment, if I would ultimately end up going through the full eviction process. Also, I was worried because that coming week, I had to go to court for something completely separate. I had to go to court because I was being accused of owing $5,000. And I needed to prove my case. Now, I didn't have $5,000 laying around, obviously. I was already behind on my rent. And so I left, went to work. Nobody at work knew what was going on. I had a bag with me. It was the weekend. They just figured I was going away for the weekend or something. And I remember staying at my friend's place that week, sleeping on the couch. And then I had to go to court. So the first beautiful miracle that took place was I had all of my documents, I had all of my papers, and the judge ruled in my favor. It was clear that I did not owe this money, and so that was cleared. That was a relief. The weight had been lifted. And the next week, I was at work, and my manager, he reached out to me and said, Greg, I need to talk to you. Come into my office when you're done, whatever you're doing. I was like, okay. I didn't know what this was about, right? Working in IT, it could be anything, whether there was a crisis or a new project happening. Sometimes I would be placed on certain things just because of my demeanor and kind of customer service focus to work with different people on different technical issues. And so I figured that's what he was reaching out to me about. And so I come into his office and I'm like, hey, Mike, what's up? What's going on? He's like, have a seat. And he wasn't that talkative, which was weird because we usually just talk, we had a good friendship. And it was almost like a scene in a movie. He has this little slip of paper and he just slides it forward to me. And I'm like, what is this? So I pick up the piece of paper and there's a dollar amount on it. But I don't know what this dollar amount means, right? Because it wasn't anything, it wasn't my salary. It wasn't large enough to be my salary. I didn't know if this was something budget related. And so he sees I'm looking, I'm kind of confused. And he goes on to tell me, he said, I know that we said that no one would be getting bonuses this year. The company was going through some financial challenges. The country was going through financial challenges. And so we knew how the economy was flowing. And we knew how things were flowing in our industry. Particularly, a lot of our counterparts and competitors were laying people off. So the fact that nobody was getting laid off, it's like, you're not going to get a bonus, but you're also going to keep your job. So I wasn't expecting the bonus. And so he says, I know I told you that we weren't giving out bonuses, but a few people are. and you're one of them. The number that was on that little piece of paper was more than enough to pay my back rent, right? And to keep me afloat, to have some left over. And I remember being so fascinated and excited, and I couldn't, at some point as he's talking, I kind of stopped hearing what he was saying because I couldn't wait to get out of his office so that I could call the management office and let them know that I will have the money. It was going to be in my next paycheck. And so I, let them know when I was going to pay the back rent so that I could get back into my apartment. And so out of that place of surrender, I experienced two miracles. Right? Out of that place of surrender, I experienced something powerful, but I waited until the last minute. Right? I used surrender as a last resort. It brings to mind something, I love how Marianne Williamson writes about this in Return to Love, right? That why don't we stay in the realm of the answer? Right? It's easy, and we've learned and we practice and we've been taught directly and indirectly to, when things get really bad, after you've done all you can, then just stand, right? After you've done all you can, then surrender, then let go. But surrender is a way of living and being that leads to miracles and answered prayers. It's active. It's an active letting and permitting. It's an active accepting of the power and presence of God operating through us. Surrender is the path to experiencing the miraculous love of God in, through, and as your life. Surrender is the path to receiving all of life's riches. Surrender is the path to miracles. Spirit is singing this love song to you today. Ain't no way for me to love you if you won't let me. Ain't no way for me to give you all you need, excuse me, if you won't let me give you all of me. Stop trying to be someone you're not. Stop relying on your humanness. Stop relying on the smallest aspect of yourself and learn to rely entirely on God in you, God as you, God through you. You are so powerful. You are so divine that God, life, source, the universe, respects your authority and autonomy. Live in thy will be done today by affirming and integrating and embodying these words. Today, I make a greater claim upon good. Today, I speak my word, knowing that it will not return unto me void. It must accomplish and prosper, not because of the power of my will, but because I am willing to let, to permit, to accept guidance, power, and peace. I am willing to let God guide me. I am willing to let love love me. I am willing to permit power and peace. I am willing to be a channel for miracles and answered prayers through my surrender. For this truth, I am so very grateful. And to the power and presence of God, to the power and presence and the vibration of this word, I simply say amen, ashe, and so it is.